In October 2015, a journalist named John Carrera received a tip. It was the kind of tip that journalists dream about and dread at the same time. The tip suggested that one of the most celebrated companies in Silicon Valley, a company valued at $9 billion, a company whose founder had appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune, a company that had been called the next Apple, was built almost entirely on a lie. The company was called Theranos. The founder was a 20-something blonde woman named Elizabeth Holmes. And the lie, if it turned out to be true, was not just a business fraud. It was a medical fraud. One that had put real patients in real danger, while the world applauded. This is the story of how one woman convinced everyone around her that she had done the impossible. And how, for more than a decade, almost nobody asked the question that would have unraveled everything. Go back to 2003. Elizabeth Holmes is 19 years old and she is sitting in a chemical engineering class at Stanford University. By most accounts she is brilliant, driven, and almost unnervingly focused. She has one obsession. She is terrified of needles. Specifically, she is terrified of the idea that the only way to get meaningful information from a human body is to stick a needle in it, draw vials of blood, send them to a lab, and wait days for results. She believes there has to be a better way. That year, she drops out of Stanford. She takes her tuition money, she rents a small office in Palo Alto, and she starts a company. She calls it Real-Time Cures, though she will later rename it Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. Her idea is seductive in its simplicity. A small device, about the size of a desktop computer, that could run hundreds of diagnostic tests using just a few drops of blood taken from a finger prick. No needles. No large vials. Just a tiny drop of blood, a small cartridge, and within minutes you would know everything your doctor needed to know about your health. Cholesterol levels. Cancer markers. Signs of diabetes. Signs of infection. All of it, from a single drop. If it worked, it would genuinely change medicine. It would democratize healthcare. It would save lives in remote villages and developing nations. It would eliminate the anxiety of sitting in a doctor's office waiting for results. It would make preventive medicine accessible to everyone. The problem, and this is the problem that would eventually bring everything down, is that it did not work. Not even close. But Elizabeth Holmes had something that many brilliant engineers and scientists do not have. She had presence. She had what people around her described as almost hypnotic charisma. She had a deep, commanding voice that she had trained to sound authoritative. She had a way of looking at you as though you were the only person in the room, as though your belief in her vision was the most important thing in the world. She wore a black turtleneck every single day, in deliberate imitation of Steve Jobs. She spoke about her company not as a business but as a mission. A calling. A revolution that would save millions of lives. And Silicon Valley, which had spent decades rewarding people who promised to change the world first and figure out the details later, opened its arms. The early investors were not ordinary people. These were seasoned venture capitalists and powerful individuals with enormous resources and decades of experience. And they wrote checks. Big ones. George Shultz, who had served as Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, became a board member and advocate. Henry Kissinger joined the board. James Mattis, a retired four-star general who would later serve as Secretary of Defense, became a board member. Rupert Murdoch invested nearly $150 million. The money poured in. And the secrecy grew with it. This is where the story gets darker. Holmes ran Theranos like a cult. Employees were required to sign extraordinarily aggressive non-disclosure agreements. Teams working on different parts of the technology were deliberately kept separate from each other so that no single engineer could see the full picture of what the machine could and could not do. Employees were warned that talking about their work, even to spouses, was a fireable offense. When employees raised concerns about whether the technology was actually functioning the way Holmes claimed, those concerns were not welcomed. People were fired. People were intimidated. The company hired the law firm of David Boies, one of the most aggressive legal operations in the country, and it used that firm the way a weapon is used. Holmes understood something important about the powerful people she was courting. She understood that nobody wanted to be the person who doubted the visionary. Nobody wanted to be the person who missed the next apple. Nobody wanted to ask the obvious question, which was, can we see a demonstration? Can we actually verify this works? And when demonstrations did happen, they were controlled carefully. The device shown to investors and board members was often not actually running the tests being described. The results being shown were sometimes generated by conventional laboratory machines made by other companies, not by the Theranos device at all. The Edison, as the Theranos device was eventually called, was a piece of theater. By 2013, Theranos had expanded into Walgreens and Safeway stores across the country. Real patients were going into Walgreens locations, pricking their fingers, submitting their tiny blood samples, and receiving results. The company was marketing this as a revolution in consumer healthcare. You could walk in off the street, no doctor's visit required, get tested for dozens of conditions, and have your results quickly. Except the results were wrong. Patients received false positives for cancer. Patients received false negatives for HIV. Patients received readings for their blood thinners that were wildly inaccurate, which in some cases caused them to alter their medication in ways that could have killed them. People made medical decisions, real life-altering decisions, based on data that had been generated by machines that were malfunctioning, by processes that had never been properly validated, by a technology that had never actually been proven to work. And through all of it, Elizabeth Holmes smiled on magazine covers and gave TED-style talks about changing the world. The people inside the company who knew the truth were terrified. One of them, a young man named Tyler Schultz, was the grandson of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State who was one of Holmes's most loyal and enthusiastic supporters. Tyler had joined Theranos because he believed in the mission. When he began to realize that the results were unreliable, when he began to raise concerns internally and was shut down, he eventually did something extraordinarily brave and costly. He became a source for John Carreras at the Wall Street Journal. Carrera's investigation, published in October 2015, was the beginning of the end. The article was careful and specific. It documented the gap between what Theranos claimed and what the technology could actually do. It cited sources inside the company. It asked questions that nobody had been willing to ask publicly. Holmes's response was ferocious. She went on television. She called the story factually wrong. She accused Carreras and his sources of being part of a conspiracy against her. She used her lawyers. She used her connections. She used every tool available to her to discredit the reporting and hold the story together. But the truth is a slow and patient force. Regulators began to look more closely. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services investigated the Newark, California laboratory where Theranos processed its tests. What they found was catastrophic. The lab did not meet basic federal standards. The quality control was so poor that it posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. In 2016, federal regulators revoked Theranos' laboratory certification, banned Holmes from operating a laboratory for 2 years, and imposed sanctions that effectively destroyed the company's core business. The investors who had written those enormous checks began to understand what had happened. The valuation of $9 billion collapsed. Partners who had championed Holmes began to distance themselves quietly. The board members who had given the company such an aura of legitimacy began the slow and uncomfortable process of reassessing everything they had believed. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes and her former president and romantic partner Ramesh Balwani with fraud. The Department of Justice filed criminal charges. Holmes was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud against investors, against doctors, and against patients. The trial, when it finally came, was extraordinary. Holmes testified in her own defense over many days. She denied intentional fraud. She claimed she had genuinely believed in the technology. She claimed she had been dominated and psychologically controlled by Balwani, who was tried separately. She wept. She was composed. She projected sincerity. The jury deliberated for 7 days. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of criminal fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. The woman who had stood on stages and told the world she was going to revolutionize medicine walked out of a courtroom as a convicted felon. What makes the story of Theranos so haunting is not just the scale of the fraud or the boldness of the deception. It is the question it forces you to ask about the system that allowed it to happen. The investors were not naive people. They were among the most experienced and well-connected individuals in American business and government. The journalists and analysts who covered Theranos for years wrote admiringly about Holmes without ever gaining access to independently verify the technology. The board members who lent their names and reputations to the company asked fewer hard questions than they should have. And a culture that celebrated the visionary disruptor, that treated skepticism as a failure of imagination, made it almost socially costly to say, "Wait. Show me proof." Elizabeth Holmes understood that culture perfectly. She lived inside it. She fed it exactly what it wanted to hear. And for more than a decade, it believed her. The patients whose test results were wrong did not have the luxury of believing in a story. They had real bodies and real diagnoses and real fears. They are the ones who deserved better. They are the ones the system failed most completely. There is a version of this story where Elizabeth Holmes is simply a brilliant liar. There is another version where she is someone who convinced herself that the vision was real enough to justify the deception, that the ends would eventually justify the means, that the technology would catch up to the promises before anyone got hurt. We will probably never know which version is true. Holmes has never fully admitted to what happened. The truth lives somewhere in the gap between her certainty and the damage she left behind. What we do know is this: $9 billion in value, built on a machine that never truly worked. Hundreds of employees whose careers and livelihoods were tied to a fraud. Patients who trusted the system and were failed by it. And one woman in a black turtleneck who looked at the world's most powerful people and made them believe. That is the story of Theranos. And it is not over. Because somewhere right now, in some office, in some pitch meeting, someone is telling a story that sounds just like this one. Someone is asking for belief before they can offer proof. And someone else is deciding whether to ask the question that needs to be asked. The question is always the same. Can you show me that this actually works? If you want the full story and more dark business secrets, find us on YouTube at Corporate Crypt. The link is in the description. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And if you want to create content like this yourself, check out the AI tools in the description below.